When the kidnappers made Richard choose between two people, he gave up his first love and chose me. But I didn't go with him. 'Cause I knew he'd regret it. In my past life, that's what happened. After I was rescued, Richard's first love was photographed in compromising photos by the kidnappers and ended up taking her own life the night she returned. Richard acted like it didn't matter, went ahead with our wedding, but made me suffer throughout the marriage. After 7 years, when I finally pushed him to agree to a divorce, he lost control on our way and drove the car off a cliff. Even near death, he blamed me. We owed Vivian in the first place. This life should have been about atoning for her. What right do you have to live in comfort? Given a second chance, I didn't want to live like that anymore. Bella, go with me. Realizing I'd been reborn, the kidnappers were holding knives to my and Vivian's throats. They told Richard to choose one to save. Richard's eyes darted between us, and after a fierce inner battle, he made the same choice as before. He reached out his hand to me. But I firmly shook my head. Richard, save Vivian first. This time around, I didn't want to owe anyone or carry the guilt of someone's life. Hearing this, Richard seemed relieved. Bella, you're my fiancée. I should save you first. But since you're saying this, don't blame me. He then hurried away with Vivian, worried I might change my mind. But unlike him, I don't regret my choices. In my last life, he brought money, but the kidnappers upped the price and said they could only take one person. Richard reluctantly chose me. But in the time it took us to gather more money, the kidnappers got tempted, took inappropriate photos of Vivian, and were about to harm her. Luckily, we arrived with the police just in time. But even without going all the way, the situation had already shattered her dignity. Vivian came home broken, and after everyone went to sleep, she cut her wrists. By the time we found her, it was too late. Richard showed no concern when he heard the news. He calmly arranged Vivian's funeral and offered a large sum of money to her family. He even refused my suggestion to postpone the wedding. Bella, marrying you was planned long ago. We can't let an outsider interfere, right? But this outsider was someone he dwelled on for 7 years. Marrying me was just a way to make me atone for Vivian's death. But what did I do wrong? After they left, I began thinking of rescuing myself. This time, I wasn't sure Richard would come back for me. In my last life, he planted a tracker in Vivian's pocket while hugging her so we could find her even if the kidnappers relocated. This time, he seemed to have forgotten. From the start, it seemed like Vivian was the only one he wanted to save. My status as his fiancée just limited him, otherwise, he would have saved her first. We were a family merger, and our feelings weren't all that great. Vivian was his childhood friend, his dearest companion growing up. Of course, Richard regretted not saving her in my past life. This time around, he could make the choice he really wanted. I was happy for him. Meanwhile, I didn't forget to find a way to escape. I knew they'd drive past a car repair shop when relocating. The mechanics there were tough and aggressive. Last time, the kidnappers tried to occupy the repair shop, but the owner, a tough guy, wouldn't have it. They brawled, and he outmatched them. In the end, afraid of making things worse, the kidnappers fled. After they got caught, the repair shop owner testified against them. Now, like before, one kidnapper stayed with me in the car. The rest headed towards the repair shop. With my hands tied, the kidnapper barely noticed me in the driver's seat. I seized the chance, biting open the car door handle with my mouth. Then I pushed the door open and ran like crazy. The car repair shop was my destination too. I was betting they wouldn't let me die helplessly. So I sprinted boldly into the chaos of the repair shop. It was a mess inside. I quickly spotted the young repair shop owner, a strikingly righteous man with a solid build and impressive skills. To avoid getting caught in the fight, I ducked and dashed towards him. But I misjudged, crashing right into him. In his arms, I went pale with fear. Sorry. I mumbled a rushed apology. Can you help me? He glanced at me, eyebrows furrowing. In the next moment, he rolled us both out of harm's way. A chair crashed right where we'd been seconds before. If he hadn't acted in time, I'd probably be injured. Still reeling from the shock, the kidnappers noticed my absence. It wasn't just about space now, they demanded I be returned. The two groups faced off. I turned to the man beside me, whispering, "If you help me, I'll do anything you want." But he didn't answer. Instead, he looked thoughtfully at the group of kidnappers. Someone behind him couldn't help but remind him, "Larry, sometimes it's better to just let things be." So his name is Larry. With no response, my heart started to sink. Whatever, no need to force an issue. When the kidnapper leader called me over for the third time, I started to walk. But soon, someone grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. It was Larry. He stepped forward and told the kidnappers, "She's under my protection today." Almost like it was fate, we suddenly heard the roar of motorcycles outside. Larry smiled confidently. "My backup's here." A few kidnappers shot me a resentful look and cursed as they walked away. My heart, still anxious, finally settled down. I quietly sighed in relief and felt the rope around my wrist loosen. It was Larry cutting the rope. "I'm Bella," I said, extending my hand. "Thanks for that." Larry, however, was focused on my wrist, where the rope had left painful marks. "Let me help you with that." I shook my head. "It's just a scratch, no big deal." "Didn't someone just say they'd do anything if I could save you?" Without waiting for a response, he pushed me onto a chair and went to get the first aid kit. "Hang in there." I bit my lip, watching him carefully tend to my wounds, feeling a warmth spread through me. I remembered in another life, right after marrying Richard. There was this one time he got drunk, and when I was helping him to bed, I casually suggested he should drink less. He exploded in anger and pushed me hard. I lost my balance and fell. My jade bracelet shattered on the floor, cutting my wrist. I screamed from the pain, holding my bleeding wrist. Richard just stared coldly at me, saying, "Does it hurt?" "It should." Vivian endured 1,000 times worse and couldn't even cry about it anymore. If it weren't for saving you, she'd never have been humiliated by those kidnappers. I sat there on the floor in disbelief as my heart grew colder. It took me a long time to find my voice again. "But the kidnappers took Vivian and me to get at you. You chose to save me first. Why this now?" Richard, now less drunk, still had cold eyes. "Bella, I never agreed with this marriage. The only reason it happened is that you told Grandma you liked me. So, you're saying if it weren't for me, you'd only need to save Vivian?" I laughed bitterly. "Richard, you blame me instead of the kidnappers?" I got up and took care of my wounds on my own. Ever since then, no matter the pain, I never mentioned it to Richard. Now, Larry was afraid I'd be in pain, awkwardly blowing on my injuries. Tears welled up in my eyes. I closed them, taking a deep breath. "What are you doing?" I asked, pretending not to know. He looked up and smiled innocently. "When I was little, my mom would do this if I got hurt." "Does it feel better?" I nodded, "Yeah, much better." Happy with my answer, he continued. But the nice moment was interrupted. "Larry, I heard someone was causing trouble at your garage, so I rushed over." "Whoa. Where'd you find such a pretty girl?" A tall man with arm tattoos came in, eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Wow, it's rare to see such a beauty around here," he said, a weird blush spreading over his face. Larry stepped in front of me. "It's handled, thanks for coming. I'll buy you a drink sometime." Tattoo guy seemed to get it and playfully teased, "Larry, you won't even play with your buddies now that you've got a girl?" He pretended to be upset, turning his head with a huff. It was clear he was acting mad. Larry sighed, then pulled him aside, whispering, "Can't you take a hint and leave us alone?" "Larry, is she your girlfriend? Do they seem like it?" "Yeah. You two look perfect together." "Glad you see it that way." You better invite me to the wedding. Wouldn't miss it. The two of them whispered conspiratorially, though their voices were low, I could hear every word. To ease the awkwardness, I pretended to be busy, looking everywhere but at them. A few minutes later, Larry managed to get the tattoo guy to leave. Once he was gone, Larry asked, "Where do you live? Let me take you home." Maybe it was selfishness, but I suddenly didn't want to go home. My parents were always busy. They wouldn't notice if I didn't go back for a month. As for Richard, if I guessed right, he probably remembered everything too. He's probably eager to be with Vivian now. We were married for 7 years, and he never brought me to any events or even shared a room with me. When people asked about me, he always looked annoyed, eventually turning me into a joke. In this life, I want to stay far away from him. So I pleaded with Larry, "Can you let me stay for a few days?" My fingers nervously tugged his sleeve. Based on both lifetimes, he's a good guy. Plus, he can protect me. What if I cling to him? Would he refuse? Larry suddenly leaned in, his eyes intense. If you keep acting like this, I might take it seriously. Maybe it's just because he's so close, but I can actually catch a whiff of that fresh soap scent on him. I swallow instinctively and am about to speak when I hear a familiar voice behind me. What are you guys doing? It's Richard. He brought the cops with him. Are you okay? Richard looks at me with genuine concern in his eyes. I shrug. Do I look like I'm not okay? Richard stays silent. Vivian walks in right after him. She glances at the repair shop, now up and running like normal, and asks bluntly, "Bella, how did you escape the kidnappers?" From what I know, there were 6 of them. You were tied up and didn't know the place well. I'm really curious. What's she getting at? Everyone knows my family and Richard's are thinking about merging through a marriage alliance. But we're also both eyeing a piece of land going to auction in 10 days, highest bidder wins. And then, at this crucial moment, I get kidnapped with a ridiculous ransom price? Bella, it's hard not to draw some conclusions. Is she seriously implying I hired the kidnappers myself? Honestly, I'm speechless, literally never been this baffled in 2 lifetimes. I do feel sympathy for what Vivian went through in her last life, but in this one, I practically saved her. Yet, as soon as she's safe, she turns around and accuses me. Really breaks my heart. Suddenly, I raise my hand and shout loudly, "Officer! Someone's slandering me over here." We all get taken in. While waiting for questioning, Vivian won't let up. "Bella, why won't you just speak up?" I scoff. "Why should I? You're not the police." Vivian falls silent. Richard can't watch anymore and stands up to defend Vivian. "Bella, Vivian's just trying to get the facts straight, so we know what to say during questioning and what not to say." "Oh, so you're planning to lie to the police now?" Richard, frustrated, stands and points at me. "Bella, you're impossible." Larry comes out of the interrogation room and sees the scene. Without a word, he steps in front of me. "Put your hand down." His voice doesn't waver, yet it holds an undeniable pressure. I hide behind Larry. I can't see their faces, but I can sense tension in the air. Richard just asks, "Who are you to her?" Larry glances at me with a slight smirk. He replies, "You tell me." Looking up, I see Larry's ridiculously perfect profile up close. On impulse, I make a heart shape with my index fingers and thumbs. Richard sees this and frowns so hard he might as well have 5 more shades of anger. At that moment, a cop calls him in for a statement. After an intense round of questioning, things become a bit clearer. The cops have some suspects. They need to catch the kidnappers to investigate further. But I know this whole mess is Richard's rival's doing. Outside the station, Larry looks at me and says, "It's a yes." What? I'm confused. He clarifies, "The thing you asked about in the afternoon, it's a yes." Got it. He's talking about letting me crash at his place. It's just my mom and me at the house, but she's gone back to the old place. I usually stay at the repair shop. Feel free. I'm about to agree when Richard chimes in, Bella, you're kidnapping. Uncle and Auntie know about it. They're probably on a flight right now, heading back. You sure you don't want to go home? A sour feeling wells up inside me. Richard, an outsider, knows my parents' business better than I do. As far back as I can remember, they've always been too busy, missed birthdays, skipped parent-teacher meetings. I'd even mess up on purpose or get hurt just to make them show up, begging for a scrap of affection. Eventually, I stopped expecting. I'd learned to celebrate alone, hire a lady from the flower shop for meetings because she was kind and pretty. Growing up like that, lonely until I met Richard. On the school basketball court, he casually blocked a ball aimed at me. The sun lit his face perfectly, sweat glistened, his slight smirk carried an unspoken arrogance. Hey, watch out, he said. With just one glance, I was captivated. Young and timid, I quietly thanked him. Then ran off. Afterwards, I started to notice him, learned he had a close first love. But they stopped there. Teenage crushes, silent but secretly sweeping through my heart. Even chance encounters, eye contact, made me blush and my heart race. I knew I might not get a say in my future marriage choice. So finding out Richard was the one had me thrilled for ages. My parents liked Richard too, talked to him more than they did to me. Last life, they flat out refused when I asked for a divorce. Richard's capable and tolerates your flaws. You're not appreciating him, making us worry. I knew that after our marriage, our family's interests were intertwined. Divorce wasn't easy. So I endured it, year after year, depression hit, self-harm followed, leaving Richard no choice but to agree. In this life, I vowed to live for myself. So I didn't want to go home. But then I remembered, I had one more thing to deal with. I took Larry's phone, dialed my number, and called myself. When I heard the ring, I returned it to him. Remember to save my number. I'll come find you in a couple of days. After saying that, I hailed a cab and left without a backward glance. I didn't look at Richard at all. When I got home, I found my parents waiting in the living room. Before I could say a word, they started scolding me. Richard told us everything that happened today. Can't you stop being so reckless? That was a kidnapper situation. You put your life at risk. And you let Richard save someone else first? Mom sighed heavily. How can we trust you with the company with decisions like that? If you didn't trust me, why did you give the company to Richard in the first place? Then, they relaxed, chasing after their youthful dreams. My dad, who'd been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. Let's just settle the marriage thing quickly. I refused. I said it in a firm, non-negotiable tone. I came back to tell you that I'm canceling the engagement tomorrow. Whether you agree or not, I'm making my own decisions this time. And don't try to use the company as leverage. Give it to whoever, I don't want it anyway. In this second chance at life, I've figured out the trends for the next 7 years. I won't be broke. After saying all that, I headed to my room. They must be even more disappointed in me now, right? Doesn't matter. The next morning, I woke up early. I saw Mom had made breakfast herself, waiting for me. Aunt Fong told me you were looking for food last night. It's my fault for not asking if you had dinner. I stood there, surprised at how suddenly warm and caring Mom was being. She gently tucked my loose hair behind my ear and in a guilty voice said, Your dad and I thought about it last night. Maybe we've been doing it wrong all this time. We wanted you to grow up strong, so we were afraid of spoiling you too much. If you want to make your own decisions, that's fine. We're not forcing you to marry Richard. Does this mean they're okay with me canceling the engagement? Suddenly, I felt a bit sad. Little Bella used to throw tantrums, but it only got her scolded. Then she learned to be obedient, thinking that would earn their attention. And what did it get her? They considered her weak and incapable. Now, using their approach with harsh words, they finally changed their mind? I still couldn't believe it as the car drove up to Richard's villa. The whole engagement idea came from Richard's grandmother in the first place. It started when I saved her at a party after she fainted from low blood sugar. After waking up, she insisted on making me her god-granddaughter as thanks. As time went on, we got acquainted, and I'd visit the old mansion for meals. I didn't realize she was Richard's grandmother until I ran into him there one time. Being the shrewd person she was, she quickly noticed my feelings for Richard. That's how all this began. Now, having to tell her about the breakup made me feel guilty. She had given me the family bracelet. But I guess I'd have to return it now. Richard arrived before me, with Vivian by his side. They were dressed to the nines. Perfect. When I end the engagement, they can jump right into a new one. Everyone will be happy. When I placed the bracelet on the table, Richard grabbed my wrist, asking, "What's this about?" Right, I forgot to mention to him last night that the meeting was to call off the engagement. Seeing us, Grandma seemed to catch on. "Bella, did Richard do something wrong?" She glared at Vivian as she spoke. I respectfully told her, "Grandma, I'm the one breaking off the engagement with Richard." I sounded calm as if I were just talking about the weather. Hearing this, Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why?" "Because you left me to save someone else. That's clearly who you want to marry, right?" I glanced at Vivian, who looked back with the stubborn face of an innocent act. "No." There was doubt in Richard's eyes. "Weren't you the one who told me to save Vivian first?" "I was testing you, and you failed." Richard fell silent. Grandma sighed, saying, "I heard about what happened yesterday. You're a good child. It's Richard who's not worthy of you." "Grandma." Richard interrupted her. He gripped my wrist so tight it felt like he might crush it. "Bella, I won't agree to this. You can't just end it." My wounds from yesterday hadn't healed. With the pressure from his grip, they were likely bleeding again. Stifling the pain, I found it all rather amusing. In my past life, after Vivian died, he mourned her for 7 years. After being reborn, he couldn't wait to rescue her again. I thought he cared deeply for her and was eager to marry her. I smirked and said, "If that's how you want it, I'll announce the breakup to the media tomorrow. It'll be your family's face that's lost, not mine." I pried Richard's fingers off one by one and turned to leave. I didn't expect Richard to follow me outside. Just then, Larry pulled up on his motorcycle at the house. To avoid further confrontation with Richard, I simply said, "Sorry, my boyfriend's here to pick me up." Richard looked annoyed, mocking, "Bella, are you really choosing this broke dude as your boyfriend? Can he make you happy? And what am I supposed to do, choose someone like you who's two-faced and fickle?" I started walking toward Larry. And just then, Richard grabbed my wrist again. "Ow!" I yelped in pain. Only then did Richard notice the wound on my wrist. "I didn't know you were hurt," he said, panicked. I looked down, smirking disdainfully, as if knowing would make you care. Larry couldn't hold back anymore. He punched Richard square in the face, knocking him to the ground. Quick and clean as ever. Richard spat out some blood, his eyes full of determination, but he didn't dare to make a move. Larry saw this and said in a warning tone, "Stay away from her." Then he placed his helmet on my head, revved the engine, and took off with me. The motorcycle sped through the mountains, and the scenery zipped by. I leaned against Larry's back, enjoying the thrill of speed. It seemed like it helped me forget the unpleasantness from earlier, even if just for a little while. "Hey, girlfriend, planning to go somewhere?" Larry's voice broke the silence from up front. I chuckled, realizing he must have heard the conversation before. Naturally, I wrapped my arms around his waist and said, "Since you're calling me your girlfriend, can I check out your place? I'm kind of hungry." "Of course, no problem. Lucky for us, I'm pretty good at cooking. I'm expecting 4 dishes then. Consider it done." Larry's laugh echoed through the mountains, somehow making me feel incredibly at ease. Larry's place was bigger than I imagined. He hurriedly fetched me a brand new pair of men's slippers. They might be a bit big, but it's the only new pair at home. I slid them on, laughing. No worries. Good thing I come back and clean up now and then. It's not too messy. Somehow, he seemed more awkward than I did, even though it was his house. I plopped down on the sofa, hand on my chin, and said, I can't cook, so it's up to you today. Larry didn't rush off to the kitchen but brought over a first aid kit instead. The wound that was bandaged yesterday had bled through after Richard grabbed it, and had dried, sticking to the gauze. Larry carefully soaked the gauze with iodine to separate it from the wound. Despite being a big guy, he was incredibly meticulous with this delicate task. Half an hour later, the wound was freshly dressed. He reminded me, try to keep it dry for a couple of days. I blurted out, but how am I supposed to shower? 2 days without a shower won't kill you, he thought for a moment, then added, I won't mind. You better not. I wouldn't dare. So, should I go start cooking? Yeah. I nodded, smiling. I realized being around Larry always made me feel relaxed. An hour later, he came out with 4 dishes, sweet and sour pork, garlic shrimp, steamed fish, and cucumber salad. He handed me a set of chopsticks. Give them a try. After sampling each dish, I gave him a thumbs up. The flavors were amazing, just like him. Seems like I won't have to worry about meals in the future. In the afternoon, my dad called. He said I should attend an auction happening in 10 days. If I could secure that piece of land, he'd let me run the company. I knew about that land. Aside from Richard and my family, a few other companies were interested. In a past life, because of the kidnapping, I was too shaken. Coupled with Vivian's death later, I wasn't in any state to compete. I got really sick and missed that auction. Even if I hadn't fallen ill, I wouldn't have competed with Richard. I thought he was the one I could spend my life with. At that time, Richard's company was facing financial issues. Securing that land was tough for him. I ended up moving some funds from my family's company to help him. Richard succeeded in the auction and built a theme park there. In a few years, it took him to new heights. That land was a sure win. That's why so many were after it. This time, I'm determined to get it. I didn't expect Vivian to come pleading. Her attitude was miles different from her aggressive demeanor days before. She was humble, almost pleading. Can you not break off the engagement with Richard? There's never been anything between us beyond friendship. If you agree, I promise never to show up in front of you again. I looked at her silently, feeling nothing but frustration. In my past life, I believed they were just friends. But after Vivian's death, Richard's behavior made it clear it was more than that. I remember the day he agreed to divorce. It was after I had sunk into depression and harmed myself the 10th time. He came home to find me bleeding on the floor. Perhaps afraid I'd die in his house, he agreed to the divorce. On our way to file, he suddenly asked, "Do you know today is Vivian's death anniversary?" I looked at him blankly, shaking my head. I couldn't even take care of myself back then, let alone remember dates. My reaction pissed Richard off. He slammed the steering wheel, calling me cold and heartless. Vivian traded her life for the life you lead today. You've never shown gratitude, even for getting her death anniversary. You just want to leave, thinking it'll lift the guilt off your conscience? Bella, you make me sick. I was angry too and snapped back, "Yeah, you're grateful, can't forget her, why don't you join her?" Right after, the car went out of control and plunged off a cliff. Even before dying, Richard accused me, "We owe Vivian. This life, we're meant to atone. Who are you to live in peace?" But this time around, neither of us owes each other. I'll wait and see what fate has in store for Richard. Making a dismissive gesture, I signaled Vivian to stop talking. Thinking about the past life made me sick. Do you even get it? Both our families have agreed to call off the engagement. Did Richard send you? She shook her head. No, it's me. I just don't want to see him lose. Bella, you were always into Richard, weren't you? It's my fault for accusing you of hiring those kidnappers. I shouldn't have come back suddenly. Otherwise, Richard wouldn't have endangered himself and upset you. I was a bit dizzy from all the twists and turns. Don't want to see him lose? Vivian explained, Richard needs that land in the south to make a comeback. Bella, if you insist on breaking off the engagement, can you at least not compete with Richard? I let out a sneer, are you dreaming? Now I finally understood. In the past, when we rushed to save Vivian, the police had already caught the kidnappers, and both hefty ransoms were successfully recovered. That's how Richard managed to acquire the land. But now, because of my self-rescue, I've spooked the kidnappers. Who knows where they've escaped to now? The police still haven't gotten any leads, let alone recovered the ransom. So, Richard has basically lost his edge if he wants that land. Vivian still wouldn't give up. She gritted her teeth and suddenly knelt in front of me. Bella, I'm begging you, you don't have to love, but can you not ruin him? I've seen moral blackmail before, but nothing quite this shameless. I leaned over, getting close to her, and whispered. When you heard about Richard's engagement with me, you left the country, but returned the moment you heard about our engagement party. You're right, all this is because of you. So, you should be the one helping him. Your family might not be as rich as mine, but they can help a bit at least, right? Besides, the last time he spent money, it was to save you, not me. So, you're coming to beg me, am I supposed to be the dumb one here? Upon hearing this, Vivian's face turned pale. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything in the end. If she can figure it out, great. If not, it's her own problem. During this time, I went home only to find my parents were out again. Looks like they're still the same, only caring about their own pursuits, never changing. All they need is a qualified heir, they don't care who it is. Whatever, it's not like I care about them that much. Spent a couple of days at home, and my hands almost healed. I grabbed a car from the garage and headed straight to Larry's repair shop. But I didn't see Larry first, I ran into the big guy with tattoos from before. He greeted me awkwardly, "Hi there, sis." "Where's Larry?" I asked. He scratched his head and replied, "Larry went out." "You need him for something?" Immediately after he said that, he slapped his forehead and mumbled, "Can't you drop by without a reason? What a dumb mouth I have." Then he gave me a big grin, "Sis, have a seat. Larry should be back soon." I nodded and sat on the sofa. There were several different sets of teaware on the coffee table. I made some tea for myself, slowly savoring it. Tattooed guy didn't leave, he looked genuinely curious, though he was trying to sneak glances at me. Seeing me make tea myself, he explained, "I'm not good with this stuff, Larry usually makes it for me. Hope you don't mind." I looked up and asked, "What's your name?" "Ken." "Does Larry treat you well?" For some reason, I just had this feeling. To my surprise, Ken shook his head, and I thought maybe I was wrong. But then he said, "No, it's not just me. Larry treats all of us well." Raising an eyebrow, I said, "Oh? Go on." Most of the employees in this repair shop are from poor rural areas. They all have some physical challenges. Like John, who fixes engines. He can't speak, but he can pinpoint any problem just by listening to it. Then there's Leo, who handles maintenance, he has a limp. Mike, who does the painting, can't read a single word. They initially came to this city looking for work, only to realize how tough it was without qualifications or skills, especially with physical limitations. Larry took them in, gave them time to learn, covered meals and board, and paid them. So they decided to stick with Larry wholeheartedly, not wanting to go anywhere else. Now I understand. I looked at Ken again and asked, "What about you?" For the first time, his face turned serious. "I met Larry 5 years ago. I pissed off some folks, nearly got myself killed, and Larry saved me. From that day, I swore I'd stick with Larry for life. If anyone dares bully him, they'll have to get through me first. Honestly, hearing that was moving. I've always felt so alone in my environment, let alone having someone genuinely care for me. But Larry managed to bring all these people together, working earnestly with him. I'm really envious. All of a sudden, I just can't wait to see him. Do you know where he went? Ken thought for a moment. Larry didn't say exactly. Just mentioned someone looking for him, probably around the nearby plaza. Just as I was about to leave, Ken seemed to remember something and said, "Oh, and sis, Larry's actually quite rich, just keeps it low-key. He actually told us not to call you sis, he said you're a rich girl and needs to be called miss." I frowned hearing that. What's with Larry and this old-fashioned title? But I never imagined I'd walk into a cafe at the plaza and see Larry sitting with Vivian. I have no clue what Vivian was telling Larry, but her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. And Larry was just listening, his frown never disappearing. After observing for a while, I noticed Vivian suddenly got up and moved from her seat across to sit next to Larry. My gut told me there was something going on between them. Before today, I probably would have just walked away and blocked Larry. I can't tolerate any impure relationships, not after being hurt before. But with Larry, I want to trust him, just once. As I was about to enter the coffee shop, I saw Larry get up quickly, like he was avoiding something unpleasant, and then he looked right at me. Compared to my calmness, Larry seemed a bit shocked to see me there, but then he walked straight towards me. "Bella." Vivian followed him out, looking a bit desperate. "Larry, I'll do anything if you agree." But when Vivian saw me, she stopped talking. She quickly regained composure and asked, "Bella, what are you doing here? Are you here for Larry too?" She edged closer to Larry. But Larry was quick to move and stood next to me instead, looking at me a bit innocently. "Bella, I acted tough, I'll deal with you later." Vivian watched us and her eyes dimmed. "Bella, I really underestimated you." I shrugged, "Right? I thought so too." Vivian seemed deflated, her expression changing colors rapidly like a spilled paint palette, a mix of green, white, and red. Actually, it's not like I usually play the fool. If it weren't for taking people who didn't care about me too seriously in my past life, I wouldn't have ended up like I did. Larry took me back to his place. It was almost dark by then. We just sat on the couch in silence for a while. Finally, he broke it. "Aren't you going to ask? Didn't you say you were going to deal with me?" I sighed. "If you want to say it, you will, whether I ask or not. If you don't want to, there's no point in asking." Larry's face was expressionless. "Do you know why Vivian came to see me?" I shook my head. On the way back, I'd thought of many reasons. Like maybe Vivian was interested in Larry? Or maybe Richard was trying to mess with us by sending Vivian to annoy me. After all, they're close and willing to do anything for each other. But Larry suddenly asked if I was eyeing a certain piece of land. I was shocked. "How do you know?" "Because that piece of land's usage rights are in my hands now. It was something my dad left me." How could this be a coincidence? Wait a minute. So Vivian hasn't given up, and she's directly targeting Larry to get to me? But how could she know the land was Larry's? There's only one answer, Richard told her. In our past life, when he took the land, he must have dealt with Larry and knew about it. Seeing Larry looking at me intently, I realized something. "You don't think I'm with you for that land, do you?" Suddenly, I felt this uncomfortable feeling inside. While I was doubting him, he was also suspecting me. I lowered my head, trying to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Seeing that, Larry suddenly held my face and said seriously, "Silly, of course, I don't think that." The idea did cross my mind for a second, but I dismissed it quickly. "I trust my judgment." I asked, "Like when you saved Ken and the others?" Larry raised an eyebrow. "No, you're different. I saved them out of kindness. I saved you because I felt something." "Larry, you're smooth." I pouted, just a bit annoyed. You must have dated a lot, being this good. Larry looked at me fondly, slightly moving his hand holding my face, forcing me to lift my head. He gave a quick, gentle kiss like a dragonfly on the water, and then stopped. It's not about being good. It's natural, from the heart, instinctive. I felt my cheeks heat up, and my heart started to race uncontrollably. Afraid he'd notice, I buried my face in his chest. Hearing his heartbeat, loud like thunder, like it was shouting his feelings for me. I closed my eyes and soaked it all in. After a while, I said, Larry, I like you as much as you like me. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he showed it through his actions. He held me tighter, like he wanted to meld us together. The next day, I got up, and Larry handed me a document. When I looked, it was a land use rights transfer agreement with my name on it. Larry, are you crazy? Do you know what this means? I couldn't believe someone could be so foolish. I've withdrawn my bid. You wanted it, I have it, so why not give it to you? I was really moved. My heart felt full, almost ready to burst. I blinked to hold back tears. This was good news, I couldn't cry. Since he showed such sincerity, I couldn't let myself fall short. I took his hand and said, before you sign, come with me somewhere. I took him to the marriage bureau. Larry asked me again and again, are you sure about this? I looked at him and laughed, aren't you worried I'll take your stuff, kick you to the curb, and then find someone more handsome and richer? Larry furrowed his brow, thinking. I can't guarantee richer, but more handsome might be tough to find. Exactly, that's why I practically kidnapped you here, I teased. I didn't expect Richard to catch up so soon. Larry and I had just left the marriage bureau, not even having the chance to put away the red certificates. Richard looked on, his expression dark as if he couldn't get any worse. Even his clenched fists were trembling. He spoke up, Bella, you ended up with him after all. You're nuts. I rolled my eyes, not planning to engage. Yet, Richard grabbed me, tears suddenly streaming down his face. Is this a joke? Crocodile tears? But there were things I wanted to say to Richard, so I told Larry to wait in the car. Once it was just the two of us, Richard couldn't wait to say, Bella, I regret it. I truly regret it. You can hit me, yell at me, just please forgive me. I chuckled coldly. Regret? Regret what? Not saving me or not treating me well in our last life? Richard let go of my wrist, the color draining from his face instantly. Seems like he doesn't even want to recall the past life. Those memories clearly revealed his various misdeeds. At this moment, Richard started slapping himself, saying, I was possessed, I was wrong, I deserve this. But Bella, is there still a chance for us? I paused, then asked, Richard, what do you think? He stopped, lowered his eyes, looking defeated. Then, like he remembered something, his eyes lit up a bit. No, it was Vivian. She ruined us. If she hadn't come back suddenly, none of this would have happened. I never asked her to find you, she acted on her own. Grabbing my hand again, he pleaded, trust me one last time, please. The one I've always loved is you. Honestly. I know I'm guilty, so I won't ask for anything from you. Just look at me. Do whatever you want. I looked at Richard in disbelief. How could these words come from him? I yanked my hand back sharply, wiping it on my clothes. Richard, what do you want, really? I certainly didn't believe he truly loved me. Once you've experienced real love, everything else feels like trash. Richard, looking ridiculously sincere, said, I realized it too late. Anyway, I won't give up on you. All I felt was a chill, like being haunted. Richard, keep this up, and I'll call the cops. Richard froze, his tears flowing like they were free. I just felt annoyed, eager to leave quickly. Richard, you've only ever loved yourself. Whether it was Vivian or me, your interests always came first. But you're just not happy that I'm better off without you, and you're trying to drag me down again. But Richard, I'm not alone anymore. My husband now, he's pretty fierce and has a whole group backing him up. If you have a death wish, go ahead and try. After saying this, I glanced over at Vivian, who wasn't far away. I'd noticed she'd followed us long before and just chose not to say anything. Hopefully, she'll see who Richard truly is before it's too late. Like that, this farce came to a close. Dad, knowing I smoothly secured that piece of land, handed the company over to me as promised. I hadn't told them about getting married to Larry because I wanted peace, just to live quietly with him. With days between the company and home, time quietly slipped away. Eventually, I heard Vivian planned to go abroad. Even the person who loved Richard most no longer wanted him. Before she left, she posted a long denunciation of Richard on social media, calling him heartless and cold. With nothing better to do, I decided to give her post a little boost. So with his company already in a debt crisis, their stock kept dropping due to this, nearing bankruptcy. Richard, frazzled and stressed, was scrambling everywhere for help. Who'd be willing to help him now? So, he turned to me again. It was months since we last met. These days, I was busy developing that piece of land, motivated by the thought of making a fortune. Now, looking at Richard, he was unrecognizable, gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, unkempt beard, his entire presence worn out. I asked, "Do you want my help?" Surprisingly, he shook his head. He said, "Bella, I have depression. Haven't slept properly in months. I feel your past pain. It's my karma." Suppressing a smile, I said, "How could this be karma? It's a blessing. Think, last life, you regretted not saving Vivian till your death. Even with success and me by your side, you weren't happy. Now, you've been given a second chance. Even if you have nothing now, you've made up for past regrets. Isn't that enough? Fortune favors you after all. You know, people just can't be too greedy. When you gain something, you lose something else. You can't have it all." That was the last time I saw Richard. 3 months later, on the night Richard's company declared bankruptcy, he got drunk. Depression kicked in, and he slipped into the bathtub. By the time he was found, he was gone. It's true what they say, what goes around comes around. When Larry heard about it, he was giving me a back massage. My dad always said, if someone doesn't have good character, they're bound for failure. I turned over and couldn't help but ask, "How far do you think we can go?" Larry thought about it seriously and said, "With how we are, 100 years isn't too much to ask for, right?" I wholeheartedly agreed. It really isn't too much. It's not too much to want a good meal, right? Larry asked, eyes fixed on me, his gaze intense. In his eyes, I seemed like the most beautiful rose in the world. They say loving someone is like tending to a flower. Larry cherishes me deeply, never wanting me to face any hardship or discomfort. And because of that, I've only gotten better. The things I couldn't get in 2 lifetimes, Larry gave me in abundance. I wrapped my arms around his neck, gave him a quick kiss, and said, "It's not too much."